What motivates a guy to engage in acts of brutality that are beyond comprehension? How can a disturbed person become a cold-blooded killer? What are the factors that contribute to this transformation? Regarding the case of Wade Wilson, a guy whose name became associated with horror in Cape Coral, Florida, in the autumn of 2019, here are the questions that continue to plague the investigation. However, the tale of Wade Wilson is not only about a killer. It is also about the victims, the warning signals that were ignored, and the town that was left in a state of disarray as a result of his heinous deeds. Context of the building. To have a better grasp on the atrocity that took place in Cape Coral, we must first investigate the individual who was responsible for the atrocities. When it came to law enforcement, Wade Wilson was not a person that was unknown. The early years of his life were marked by instability and run-ins with the authorities. He was born in the late 1980s. The fact that Wilson was raised in a chaotic household that was characterized by drug misuse and violence had a negative impact on his future in the most worst manner conceivable. Wilson was a well-known figure to the authorities when he was a young adult. He was accused of committing a variety of felonies, including drug violations, domestic violence, and other offenses. Nevertheless, Wilson seemed to be able to avoid being caught by the criminal justice system, despite the fact that his criminal record was rising. In spite of the fact that his erratic conduct and repeated arrests were warning indications that something more sinister was simmering under the surface, such cautions were generally ignored over the course of his life. By the year 2019, Wade Wilson had made his home at Cape Coral, a community on the coast that is well known for its peaceful neighborhoods and picturesque canals. On the other hand, Wilson was holding a terrible wrath under the surface of this idyllic village. This rage would eventually burst in a sequence of violent deeds that would permanently affect the lives of those who were around him. Also, if you're fascinated by true crime stories and want to hear more about cases like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You'll be the first to know when we drop our next chilling tale. Introducing the victims of the crime. Christine Melton, who was 35 years old at the time, died as the first victim. She was a lady who had the unfortunate experience of coming into contact with Wade Wilson. Christine's friends and acquaintances characterized her as a caring and compassionate person when they spoke about her. She had a life that should have been full of potential since she was a mother, a daughter, and a friend. But instead, she was not. On the other hand, Christine's life was cut short in the most heinous manner available on October 7, 2019. The relationship between Christine and Wade was a tumultuous one that was characterized by disputes and physical altercations. On the day that would forever change the course of history, neighbors reported hearing cries coming from Christine's house. But by the time the police came, it was already too late. The body of Christine, who had been the victim of a vicious assault, was discovered inside her home. After fleeing the scene, Wade Wilson left behind a trail of evidence that would eventually lead to his imprisonment when it was discovered. On October 9th, only 2 days after the first catastrophe, another tragedy occurred in Cape Coral. A missing person report was filed for Diane Ruiz, a lady who was 43 years old and had not returned home from her place of employment. Diane was a well-liked and respected member of the community. She was well known for her kindness and the love that she had for her family. Shockwaves were sent through the community when the news of her abduction was reported, and a large search effort was initiated in an attempt to locate her. On the other hand, the quest resulted in grief. The corpse of Diane was found in a forested location only a short distance away from where she lived. She had been killed by being strangled, and once again, all indications pointed to Wade Wilson as the perpetrator. The investigation begins to expand. There was a widespread sense of disbelief among the Cape Coral neighborhood when the corpse of Christine Melton was found inside her home. The detectives from the Cape Coral Police Department arrived at the site in a short amount of time and immediately started putting together the pieces of the puzzle that led up to her death. It was clear that the crime had been committed with a high degree of violence. Christine had been battered and strangled, and the home had traces of a violent fight. The fact that the perpetrator had a personal relationship to the victim made it very evident that this could not have been a random crime. While the detectives were searching through the crime scene, they discovered a number of important pieces of evidence that would later prove to be essential in establishing a connection between Wade Wilson and the murder. The collection of DNA samples, fingerprints, and blood spatter analysis was carried out with great concentration. Throughout the night, forensic specialists worked tirelessly, and it wasn't long before the evidence started to point in a path that was quite unsettling. Within a short period of time, Wade Wilson, a guy who had a well-documented history of violent behavior and a troubled connection with Christine, emerged as the primary suspect. Neighbors said that they heard loud disputes coming from Christine's house in the days preceding up to her death, and some of them even remembered seeing Wilson around the property around the time that the murder occurred. After receiving this information, the investigators started looking for Wilson, who had disappeared after the incident, since it seemed that he had gone. At precisely the time that the inquiry into the murder of Christine was gradually gathering speed, another tragedy occurred. The missing person report for Diane Ruiz was filed on October 9th when she did not come home from her place of employment. Immediately, her family were worried since it was absolutely out of character for Diane to go without a trace without leaving a notification. The members of her family and friends started looking for her, distributing flyers, and asking for information on various social media platforms. Because of the growing dread that another predator would be on the loose, the community's anxiety level increased. On the other hand, they were not yet aware of the fact that Diane's disappearance was connected to the same individual who was responsible for Christine's killing. After discovering that Diane, too, had known Wade Wilson, the investigators immediately recognized that there was a link between the two persons. In the weeks leading up to her abduction, the two had come into contact with one another, and there were evidence that Wilson had acquired an unhealthy infatuation with her. The police discovered security tape from a nearby convenience shop that showed Wilson and Diane together only a few hours before she was last seen. This discovery came as the search efforts became more and more intensive. The surveillance film showed them having what looked to be a pleasant discussion. Nevertheless, the investigators saw that Diane's body language was tight, as if she was aware of something that was worrying her. In the end, this tape would prove to be an essential component in the construction of the case against Wilson. Given that Diane had not yet been located, the feeling of urgency increased. Through the use of Wilson's mobile phone data, the investigators were able to piece together a chronology of his activity in the days leading up to both of the murders. Based on these data, it was evident that Wilson had been in the neighborhood of the residences of both women on the days that they were either reported missing or murdered. However, in order to guarantee that they had a strong case, the detectives need further evidence, which was becoming increasingly damning. After then, the breakthrough that would determine Wade Wilson's destiny occurred next. A corpse was found in a highly forested location only a few miles away from Diane's home, which was a horrible find that was made by a group of volunteers after many days filled with extensive searching. It turned out to be Diane Ruiz. Her corpse had been left to rot in the isolated place after she had been killed by being strangled to death. When the find was discovered, it verified the worst concerns that the community had, and it drove the investigators into overdrive. The corpse of Diane and the location where she was discovered were subjected to forensic examination, which uncovered crucial evidence. Wade Wilson's DNA was found to be identical to the samples that were taken from her corpse, and the tire tracks that were found close to the scene were compatible with Wilson's car. It was the smoking gun that the detectives needed. It was evidence that was unmistakable and indisputable that linked Wilson to both killings. While the investigators were getting closer to Wilson, they discovered further troubling conduct on his part. After conducting interviews with people he knew, it was discovered that Wilson had been exhibiting more erratic behavior in the days preceding up to the killings. In addition to displaying an explosive temper, he had threatened to teach them a lesson and made remarks that were both ambiguous and frightening. Anger and a need to be in charge were the driving forces behind these reports, which formed a picture of a guy who was spinning out of control. Wade Wilson was ultimately apprehended by the authorities in the couple of days that followed the discovery of Diane's death. His manner was quite unpredictable, and his look was untidy when he was discovered hiding out at the residence of a friend. Wilson did not put up any resistance as the cops approached. As a matter of fact, he seemed almost indifferent to his arrest, as if he was aware that his time had come to an end. As soon as Wilson arrived back at the station, his conduct took a sinister turn. The questioning that he was subjected to was marked by alternating periods of unnerving stillness and explosive wrath on his part. Occasionally, It seemed as if he took great pleasure in revealing the specifics of his criminal activities, taunting the investigators with grisly tales of the things he had committed. Nevertheless, there were times when he seemed disinterested, as if the seriousness of his acts had not yet completely registered in his mind. An enormous amount of evidence was presented against Wade Wilson. The authorities found a series of text messages on Wilson's phone that further linked him in the murders. These texts were uncovered in addition to the DNA evidence and the CCTV film. Within a single message that was sent just a few hours before to the murder of Christine, Wilson said in a menacing manner, "You'll see what happens when you cross me." After Diane's disappearance, another message was sent to a friend, and it simply said, "It's done." The case against Wade Wilson was completely solid because of the quantity of evidence that was presented. After conducting the inquiry, it was discovered that Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz had been victims of a series of violent acts and obsessions that ultimately resulted in their untimely deaths. Despite the fact that the detectives had completed their mission, the horror of what they had seen would remain with them for a considerable amount of time. Wade Wilson's arrest and subsequent confession brought an end to a horrific chapter for the town of Cape Coral, which had been going on for quite some time. As the legal processes got underway, however, it became abundantly evident that this matter would continue to be a source of anxiety for everyone involved for many years to come. The disturbing testimony and the trial of the defendant. As soon as the trial of Wade Wilson started at the beginning of the year 2020, it became immediately evident that this would not be a typical case. An overwhelming amount of evidence was produced by the prosecution, which included forensic data, surveillance video, and testimonials from those who were familiar with Wilson. The person who surprised everyone in the courtroom the most was Wilson himself. Throughout the course of the trial, Wilson exhibited conduct that was both peculiar and unnerving. In addition to making caustic comments and laughing inappropriately at inappropriate times, he displayed a total lack of empathy for the people he victimized. On one occasion, he even went so far as to stop the proceedings in order to make a remark that was quite chilling. "I'm not sorry for what I did. They were deserving of it." Every single person in the courtroom felt a chill go down their spine as they heard these remarks. It was quite evident that Wade Wilson was not only a killer. Rather, he was a guy who took pleasure in the anguish and distress that he brought upon others. A guy who was beyond redemption was shown by his lack of remorse, his frightening manner, and his history of violent behavior. All of these factors contributed to the overall image. The defense made an effort to demonstrate that Wilson's acts were the product of mental illness. As proof, they pointed to Wilson's history of drug usage as well as his unpredictable conduct. But the jurors did not believe the evidence. There was little space for question because of the ferocity of the acts, as well as Wilson's terrifying lack of remorse for his previous actions. The verdict in addition to the aftermath. After many weeks of hearing evidence and deliberating, the jury finally came to a decision. Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz were both murdered, and Wade Wilson was judged to be responsible for their deaths. As a result of the judge's decision to condemn him to life in jail without the possibility of parole, it is certain that he will never again be allowed to cause suffering to another individual. Despite the fact that the punishment provided the families of the victims with some degree of closure, the anguish that they felt as a result of their loss will never really go away. A terrible act of violence took the lives of Christine and Diane, who were more than just names in a headline. They were mothers, daughters, and friends whose lives were taken from them. Additionally, the case of Wade Wilson brought up significant concerns about the function of the criminal justice system and its capacity to safeguard the general public from potentially harmful persons. It is incomprehensible that a guy who had a history of such aggressive behavior was permitted to continue living freely. If the warning indications had been taken more seriously, would it have been possible to avoid these catastrophes having occurred? These are issues that continue to be asked in the community of Cape Coral and outside what is considered to be the city. Considerations regarding the case. The story of Wade Wilson serves as a jarring reminder of the dangers that are presented by those who are able to evade the provisions of the system. It is a narrative about lost chances, about lives that were cut short, and about a community that was left to pick up the pieces after an unfathomable atrocity occurred. In addition to that, it is a tale of perseverance. The families of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz have shown an extraordinary amount of resilience in the face of their loss, transforming their sorrow into a driving force for change. They are now champions for the rights of victims, and they are fighting to guarantee that other people do not have to go through the same suffering that they have gone through. In the end, the legacy of Wade Wilson is not only one of violence and murder. Rather, it is a reminder of the need of being vigilant, of taking threats seriously, and of the necessity of protecting the individuals of our community who are most susceptible to harm. However, the lessons that may be gained from this case will help prevent such catastrophes from occurring. The wounds that were caused by his acts will never completely heal. Become a part of our true crime family by subscribing to the channel. We cover some of the most intriguing cases, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Statement of consolation. During this time of reflection on the horrific events that took place in Cape Coral, it is imperative that we remember the victims, including Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. However, their memories will continue to live on in the hearts of those who loved them, even if their lives were cut short by a man who exemplified the absolute worst sides of mankind. After that, I would want to thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon.